Have you ever wondered what it's like to be the daughter of a billionaire, yet work as a simple dishwasher? In this video, I'm going to reveal how she's making the biggest decisions of her life. Will she join her father's empire, or will she follow her own dreams to freedom? This story will change your perspective, so stay tuned. Emily stood at the dishwashing station, her hands submerged in hot water as she scrubbed plates, glasses, and silverware. The steady clinking of dishes provided a rhythm to her day, a steady reminder of the simple life she led. To most, she appeared just like any other employee at the upscale restaurant she worked at. But to Emily, the life of a dishwasher was a disguised role she played to escape her reality. Her father, Arthur Montgomery, was the owner of a billion-dollar empire that spanned across industries. From real estate to tech, he was a name known in the highest circles of business, a man whose wealth seemed limitless. But Emily had no interest in that world. She had grown up in its shadow and had seen firsthand the kind of pressure it placed on her family. The constant demands, the expectations, and the relentless pursuit of more. To her, it was suffocating. Her father's empire was built on the sweat and blood of many, but Emily had never felt like she was part of that world. She had always been kept at a distance, not because of any animosity, but because her father believed that the world of wealth and power should remain separate from her upbringing. It was as if he wanted to shield her from the very thing that had brought him so much success, perhaps to protect her from the complications that came with it. When Emily was younger, she had tried to rebel against the life her father envisioned. For her, she had dreams of becoming a writer, a voice in the world, someone who could create art that mattered. But those dreams were often met with disapproval. Her father had always pushed her to join the family business, to understand the intricate world of high finance, but Emily was determined to carve her own path. She enrolled in a liberal arts college, far from the mansion she had called home, and pursued her passion for literature. After graduation, instead of returning to her father's empire, Emily moved to the city, taking a job at a small cafe, then later a restaurant. It was there, in the clattering noise of dishes and the warmth of the kitchen, that she found peace. The anonymity of the job gave her a sense of freedom, a break from the expectations that her last name carried. It allowed her to live a life that was hers to control, even if it meant working long hours for a modest wage. But Emily knew that hiding in the back of a restaurant could only last so long. Sooner or later, the world would find out who she was, the daughter of Arthur Montgomery, the billionaire. And when that day came, she would have to face the consequences of living in the shadows of an empire. One evening, as Emily was finishing her shift, a man walked into the restaurant, his presence unmistakable. He was dressed in a sleek suit, his sharp features and confident stride betraying his wealth. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She recognized him instantly. Jonathan Miller, a renowned entrepreneur who frequently crossed paths with her father. He looked around the restaurant, and his eyes locked onto Emily. A smile spread across his face as he approached the dishwashing area. Well, Jonathan said, his tone both amused and curious. I never expected to find you here. Emily forced a smile, trying to mask the nervousness she felt. She had known this moment would come eventually, but that didn't make it any easier. Jonathan was part of the world she had tried so hard to escape. What are you doing here? He asked, clearly aware of the irony of the situation. I'm working, Emily replied simply, not willing to indulge in a long conversation. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, his gaze sweeping over her as if sizing her up. Your father would never approve of this, he said. Emily stiffened. She had heard that line before. It was the same line her father had used when she first left for college, the same line he used when she had pursued her own dreams instead of following in his footsteps. Maybe not, she said, her voice steady, but I don't need his approval to live my life. Jonathan leaned against the counter, clearly intrigued. So, this is your big rebellion, huh? Hiding away in a dishwashing station, pretending to be someone you're not. Emily bristled at his words, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I'm not pretending to be anything. I'm just doing my job." Jonathan chuckled softly. "Well, I have to admit, it's quite the contrast to the world you're from. But you know, sooner or later, your father's world will come calling for you. You can't escape it forever." Emily glanced down at the pile of dishes in front of her, her fingers still working methodically, even though her mind was elsewhere. She didn't want to hear about her father's world. Not now. Not from someone like Jonathan. "Maybe I don't need to escape it," she said quietly. "Maybe it's just not the world I want to live in." Jonathan was silent for a moment, as if weighing her words. Finally, he nodded. "Well, if you ever get tired of washing dishes, you know where to find me." With that, he turned and left the restaurant, leaving Emily standing there, her thoughts swirling. She had always known that her father's world would eventually come for her, but for now, she was determined to stay hidden in the shadows. The question was, how long could she keep running? The following weeks passed in a blur. Emily found herself going through the same motions, washing dishes, serving customers, and blending into the background of the restaurant. Yet, despite her attempts to maintain her anonymity, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Jonathan's words lingered in her mind, echoing like a distant drumbeat. "Your father's world will come calling for you." She tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the simplicity of her life. The restaurant had become her sanctuary, the clattering of plates and glasses offering a strange sense of comfort in a world that seemed to demand so much. Of her expectations she could never meet, this was where she felt grounded, where no one cared about her last name, where she was just another worker in the kitchen, trying to make it through the day. But her peaceful existence was about to be shattered out one evening. As she was cleaning up after the last dinner rush, a letter arrived. The envelope was thick and crisp, the kind of paper that felt expensive in her hands. Emily hesitated for a moment before opening it, recognizing the elegant script on the front. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the name in the address field. Arthur Montgomery. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't heard from her father in months. He had never been one for casual communication, and their relationship had only grown more strained over the years. The letter felt heavy with expectation, like it carried the weight of the empire she had long since turned her back on. Emily tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter. It was brief, but to the point. "Dear Emily, I hope this letter finds you well. I've recently come to realize that I have neglected our relationship, and for that, I apologize. It has come to my attention that you have been working at a restaurant, far from the life I envisioned for you. While I respect your independence, I believe it is time we have a conversation. Please join me at Montgomery Estates next weekend for a private family gathering. It is long overdue that we discuss your future, and how you fit into the family business. Warm regards, Arthur Montgomery." Emily stared at the letter, her mind racing. The invitation was unexpected, but not entirely surprising. She had always known that sooner or later, her father would try to pull her back into his world. But this felt different. The apology, the mention of their strained relationship, it was a far cry from the cold, businesslike tone he usually adopted. She didn't know what to make of it. Part of her wanted to reject the invitation outright, to continue hiding in her small, humble life. But another part of her one, that she had buried deep down for years, wondered if this was her chance to understand her father better, to see if there was more to him than the distant, driven man she had always known. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of the family gathering, of her father's empire, and of the life she had long since abandoned. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face that world again. But one thing was certain she couldn't ignore: the invitation. The next morning, she found herself standing in front of her small, cluttered apartment mirror, debating whether or not to go. She had always hated the idea of the family business, the wealth, the politics. It had always felt like a trap. But could she really keep hiding forever? Could she live the rest of her life pretending that she wasn't part of something bigger than herself? With a deep breath, she made up her mind. She would go. The day of the gathering drive to Montgomery Estates was longer than she remembered. Emily hadn't been back to the mansion since she was a teenager, and as she made her way up the long, winding driveway, memories began to flood back. The estate was everything she had once despised: grand, imposing, and cold. The kind of place where the lawns were perfectly manicured and the houses seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. She parked her car near the entrance and took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The last time she had stepped foot here, she was a different person, an obedient daughter, ready to follow in her father's footsteps. But that was before she realized that she didn't want to be part of this world. Before she understood that the price of living in a gilded cage was too high. As she walked up the grand staircase to the front door, the sound of her heels echoing through the marble hallway, she was greeted by one of the household staff. They led her into a large sitting room where her father stood waiting. As imposing and aloof as ever, Arthur Montgomery looked exactly the way she remembered: tall, with sharp features and the same air of authority that had always made him seem untouchable. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed back, his expression unreadable. "Emily," he said, his voice surprisingly warm. "I'm glad you could make it." She gave him a stiff nod, unsure of how to respond. The years of distance between them had created an uncomfortable silence that neither seemed able to break. "You've grown up well," he continued, his eyes scanning her carefully, as if trying to assess who she had become. "I've heard good things about you." Emily shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "I've been busy." Her father smiled faintly, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "Busy, indeed. But I think it's time we discussed your future. You're not just any ordinary young woman, Emily. You're my daughter. And whether you like it or not, you're a part of something much bigger than you realize." Emily bristled at his words, but she kept her composure. "I've made my own choices. Dad, I'm not interested in joining your empire." Arthur's smile faded, and he stepped closer to her. "I understand that, but you need to understand something. This empire, this family, is not just about money. It's about legacy, about power, about changing the world." "Is that what you think?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with bitterness. "That you can change the world with money, by owning everything?" Arthur's expression hardened. "You've always had a way of seeing the world in black and white, Emily. But there's more to it than that. This empire is my way of making a difference, and one day it will be yours." Emily looked at her father, her heart racing. She had come here expecting the confrontation, but this was something different. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of doubt. Could she really escape the life her father had created, or was she destined to be part of it, whether she liked it or not? The days following her meeting with her father were a whirlwind of emotions. Emily had returned to the restaurant after the family gathering, her mind heavy with the weight of their conversation. It wasn't just the words he had spoken that lingered. It was the way he had looked at her, as if trying to measure her worth, trying to decide if she was the heir he had always envisioned. The conversation had shaken something inside her, something she didn't want to acknowledge. Her father had always been a figure of authority in her life, but he had never been this persistent, this insistent on bringing her back into his world. She had always thought that the life she had chosen for herself, working in the restaurant, living simply, was a refuge, a way to escape the suffocating expectations of the Montgomery legacy. But now, sitting in her small apartment late at night, she couldn't help but wonder if it had been a form of running away. For years, she had convinced herself that her father's empire was something she didn't need, but now that he had re-entered her life, she could feel the pull of his world, like a magnet drawing her in. She had always prided herself on her independence, on her ability to make her own way in the world. But was it really independence if she had always been hiding? Was she truly free if she had spent her entire adult life avoiding the legacy? that she had been born into. The questions plagued her, and yet she couldn't bring herself to answer them. She went through the motions of her day, washing dishes, serving customers, but her thoughts were consumed by the looming decision she had to make, a new opportunity then. One morning, as she was wiping down the counter in the restaurant, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was familiar. Jonathan Miller. "Emily, I hope I'm not disturbing you," Jonathan said, his tone smooth as always. "I have an offer for you." Emily froze. She had hoped to avoid contact with him after their brief conversation at the restaurant. She had no desire to get pulled into his world, the world of business, of power, of wealth. But now, her curiosity got the better of her. "What's the offer?" she asked cautiously. "I'm hosting a charity event next month, and I'd like to invite you to attend," Jonathan said. "It's going to be a high-profile event, and I think you'd fit in perfectly. Plus, I believe your presence would benefit both your father's interests and your own." Emily's stomach churned. She had no desire to attend such an event, but there was something about Jonathan's words that struck a chord with her. Could this be a way to get closer to understanding her father's world? Without fully stepping into it, she wasn't sure, but part of her wanted to say yes. "I'll think about it," she said after a moment of silence. "Take your time," Jonathan replied smoothly. "I'll send you the details. Let me know if you change your mind." As Emily hung up the phone, she couldn't shake the feeling that Jonathan's offer was just another doorway into the world she had tried so hard to avoid, but perhaps it was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. Maybe it was time to stop hiding and face the choices that lay ahead. The charity event. The day of the charity event arrived quickly, and Emily found herself standing in front of a mirror, staring at the reflection of someone she hardly recognized. She had always been a minimalist when it came to fashion, preferring comfortable clothes over anything flashy. But today, she had donned a sleek, black dress that hugged her curves, and her hair was styled into a polished updo. She had never felt so out of place in her own skin. The event was being held at a grand ballroom, and as Emily walked inside, she couldn't help but be overwhelmed by the opulence of it all. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their light reflecting off the polished marble floors. The guests were dressed in extravagant outfits, their conversations hushed as they sipped champagne and discussed business deals and political connections. It was a world so different from the one she had known, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant to be here, whether she liked it or not. Jonathan spotted her as soon as she entered the room, his face lighting up with a smile that was both charming and calculating. "You made it," he exclaimed, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of a few nearby guests. "I knew you would." Emily offered a tight smile, unsure of how to respond. "I almost didn't." "Well, I'm glad you did," Jonathan said, taking her arm and leading her deeper into the crowd. "Let me introduce you to a few people. You'll find that this world isn't as intimidating as it looks." As the evening wore on, Emily found herself surrounded by people she had only ever heard about. In passing, business magnates, politicians, celebrities, all talking in hushed tones, discussing their deals, their ambitions, their power. It felt like a game, a performance, with everyone playing their parts to perfection. And yet, Emily couldn't help but feel like an outsider, someone who didn't belong. Jonathan introduced her to a few key players in the business world, each of them offering her polite smiles and handshakes, but there was no warmth behind their words. They were all just trying to size her up, to figure out if she was worth their time. Finally, Jonathan led her to a quieter corner of the ballroom, where a familiar face stood waiting. "Ah, Emily," Arthur Montgomery said, his voice carrying across the room with ease. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, his eyes sharp and calculating. "It's good to see you here." Emily stiffened, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't expected her father to be at the event. She had hoped that, perhaps, by staying hidden in the crowd, she could avoid him for a little longer. But now, here he was, standing right in front of her. "You've done well for yourself, Emily," Arthur continued, his gaze unwavering. "I always knew you had potential, but this is where you belong." Emily felt a surge of frustration rise within her. She had been trying to avoid this world, to live on her own terms, and yet here her father was, pulling her right back into it. "I'm not sure about that," she replied coolly, her eyes locking with his. Arthur smiled, as if he knew something she didn't. "You'll see, Emily, one day. You'll realize that this is where you're meant to be." Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her father's words hung in the air long after he had said them. This is where you're meant to be. The charity event continued around her, with music and conversation flowing, but she felt like an outsider in a world she had tried so desperately to escape. Her father's empire had always seemed so distant, so cold, but now it felt like it was drawing her in again, like the gravitational pull of a star, unavoidable and all-encompassing. Every move, every decision she made was bound to come back to this, her father's wealth, his expectations, and the empire he had built. But despite the unease swirling in her chest, Emily couldn't help but feel a small flicker of something else, a curiosity, perhaps, or even a yearning. Her life in the restaurant, simple as it was, had offered her a sense of independence. But at what cost? The long hours, the isolation, the constant feeling that she was hiding from something greater. Was she truly free, or was she simply running away? As the night wore on, Emily found herself in conversation with a few of her father's colleagues. They spoke to her as if she were someone important, someone they needed to impress. Their words were laced with compliments, but underneath the surface, she could feel the tension, the sense that they were measuring her, trying to figure out if she would be an asset to their world. "Your father has big plans for you," one of them remarked. "He's been talking about passing the reins to you, Emily. It's time for you to join the business." The words hit her like a slap in the face. She had been expecting them, but hearing them aloud, from someone other than her father, made the reality all the more overwhelming. This wasn't just a casual suggestion. It was an expectation, a path already paved for her, and all she had to do was step into it. She excused herself from the conversation, feeling trapped, and stepped out onto the balcony for some fresh air. The cool night breeze brushed against her skin, offering a brief moment of clarity. Below her, the lights of the estate stretched out in every direction, the sprawling mansion and gardens a symbol of everything her father had built. She had grown up here, surrounded by luxury and privilege, but it had never felt like home. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind her. "You look out of place, Emily." Jonathan's voice was calm, but there was something in his tone that made her turn to face him. "I don't belong here," she admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. "You're wrong," Jonathan said, stepping closer. "You do belong here. You just don't see it yet." Emily's heart pounded as he moved closer, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "I've spent my entire life trying to avoid this world, but now I can't seem to escape it." Her voice faltered, and for the first time, she allowed herself to be vulnerable. "My father, he wants me to take over, to be a part of his empire." Jonathan's expression softened, and for a moment, Emily saw a side of him that was different from the confident businessman she had come to know. He seemed almost empathetic. "Look," he said, his voice quieter now, "you have choices, Emily. Your father may have built this empire, but you don't have to live in it. You can walk away, or you can embrace it. But the one thing you can't do is pretend it doesn't exist." Emily turned her gaze back to the lights below, her mind racing. Walk away. Embrace it. She had always believed that she had control over her own life, that she could create her own path. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that her father's world was never as far away as she had hoped, and the idea of turning her back on it completely, of walking away from everything he had worked for, felt impossible. Her father's words echoed in her mind again. "You're meant to be here." But was that the truth, or was it just another way of chaining her to a life she didn't want? Jonathan's presence was like a constant reminder of the tension between the two worlds she occupied. He had been the one to invite her to the charity event, to show her what this world had to offer. But even as he tried to comfort her, she couldn't shake the feeling that he had his own agenda. Was he really trying to help her, or was he just playing his part in the larger game? "I don't know what to do," Emily confessed, the weight of her choices finally settling in. "You don't have to decide tonight," Jonathan said, his voice gentle. "But you will have to decide soon, and whatever you choose, just remember you don't have to do it alone." They returned to the restaurant the next morning. Emily returned to the restaurant, her mind still clouded with the events of the previous night. She had slept little, her thoughts churning with doubt and uncertainty. The world she had tried to leave behind was creeping closer, like an inevitable tide, and no matter how hard she fought it, she couldn't escape its pull. As she entered the restaurant, the familiar smells of food and the sounds of clattering dishes were a small comfort. The kitchen was busy as usual, but this time it felt different. She was no longer just a dishwasher. She was a woman on the edge of a decision that would change everything. When she reached the dishwashing station, she found herself staring at the pile of dirty plates in front of her. The simplicity of the task was grounding, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation she had had with Jonathan and the words her father had spoken at the charity event. "You're meant to be here." Was she, or was that just a lie her father had told her to keep her tethered to his world? The steady rhythm of her work began to calm her mind, but deep inside, she knew that the time had come for her to make a choice. Could she continue living in the shadows of her father's empire, hiding away in the quiet corners of a restaurant? Or would she finally step into the light and face the future her father had planned for her? The following week, Emily couldn't escape the weight of her decision. Every corner of her life felt consumed by the dilemma whether to stay in the life she had built for herself, far removed from the empire her father had created, or to step into the world of business, wealth, and power that was waiting for her to claim it. The simplicity of her life, the satisfaction of washing dishes and making small talk with regular customers, was all she had known for years. But the thought of what lay beyond the restaurant, beyond the endless clattering of plates and cups, was tempting. She had tried to forget the pressure mounting from all sides, the polite but insistent remarks from Jonathan, the subtle expectation in her father's gaze, the conversation she overheard from her father's colleagues, all of them urging her to come into the fold. Emily knew that there would be no turning back once she made a choice, and that was the hardest part. Her mind wandered back to the charity event. The last time she had seen her father, his words had haunted her, "You're meant to be here." But was she, as much as she hated the thought of being molded into someone's vision of who she should be? Emily realized she had to confront her fear head-on. She was terrified of disappointing her father, terrified of the life that was being forced upon her. But most of all, she feared losing herself in a world that was never truly hers. It was in the quiet moments of reflection when she was alone, staring out the window of her apartment, that she realized something profound. She didn't have to choose between the two extremes. She didn't have to completely abandon the life she had made for herself, nor did she have to surrender to the pressures of her father's empire. She could create her own path, one that combined the strength and wisdom of her family's legacy with the simplicity and freedom she had found in her own life. The meeting's decision had come slowly, but now, as Emily sat across from her father in his lavish office, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. The large desk between them was a symbol of the world. He had built the world he expected her to inherit, but Emily was no longer afraid of it. Arthur Montgomery sat across from her, his eyes sharp as ever. He didn't smile when she entered, nor did he speak immediately. The silence stretched between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the years they had spent apart, of the paths they had each chosen. "You've made your decision," her father said, breaking the silence. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Emily nodded, her hands folded in her lap. She had thought about this moment for a long time, rehearsed what she would say, but now, As the time had come, her words flowed easily. "I've decided that. I'm not going to take over the business," she said, her voice steady. "I appreciate everything you've done for me, everything you've built. But that's not the life I want." Arthur's face remained neutral, but Emily could see the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. She had expected it, but it didn't change the truth of her decision. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice calm, but filled with an edge that suggested he wasn't ready to let go of the idea just yet. "Yes," Emily replied. "I've built my own life, and I want to continue on that path. But that doesn't mean I'm rejecting everything you've done. I could still be part of this world in my own way. I don't need to run the empire to be part of it." Her father stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. Emily could feel the tension between them, the history of unspoken expectations and broken dreams. But finally, Arthur nodded slowly. "I've always known you were different," he said, his voice softer than she had expected. "But I never thought you would walk away from all of this, from everything I've worked for." Emily felt a pang in her chest, but she held her ground. "I'm not walking away from you, Dad. I'm just walking towards something else, something that's mine." Her father leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping gently against the armrest. For the first time in years, Emily felt like he was truly seeing her, not the daughter he had imagined, but the woman she had become. "I can't say I understand your decision," Arthur said, his voice tinged with regret, "but I do respect it, and I suppose I've always wanted you to have the freedom to choose." Emily felt a rush of relief wash over her, but there was still a part of her that felt the weight of her father's world, the part of her that would never fully be free of it. She had made her decision, but the consequences of that decision were still to come. There was no turning back. A new beginning. The weeks that followed were a blur of change. Emily had returned to her life in the restaurant, but something inside her had shifted. The constant pressure from her father had finally lifted, and she was free to live the life she had chosen for herself. But this time, she wasn't hiding from the world. She was embracing it. She had made a pact with herself not to give up the chance to be part of her father's world, but to do it on her own terms. She didn't need to run the empire, but she could still be a part of it, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. One evening, as she was finishing her shift, Jonathan called again. This time, his voice was different, less polished, less calculated. "Emily," he said, "I think you made the right decision, but there's still a place for you here. In this world, if you ever change your mind, you know where to find me." Emily smiled, a sense of peace settling in her chest. "Thanks, Jonathan, but I think I'm exactly where I need to be." As she hung up the phone, Emily looked around the restaurant, taking in the familiar sights and sounds. This was her life, and for the first time, she was ready to live it fully, on her own terms. She wasn't her father. She wasn't Jonathan. She was Emily, and that was enough.